Taylor, and this is a SAMHSA Native Connections grantee webinar. Along with the Native Connections team and our SAMHSA contracting officer representatives, Maureen Madison and Jan Domberg Cooper, we extend a warm welcome to all of you. I'll turn this over to Julie, and then she can introduce Hunter for us.
Thank you, Mark. My name is Julie White Pigeon, and I invited a colleague to share with us our opening in a good way. So if we could look at the opening in a good way screen. There we go. So I'd like to introduce my Nichkewe Hunter Genia. And Hunter, I asked him to open in a good way. And so I'd like to turn it over to him to get us started. Thank you.
Jimmy Glitch, Julie, Ani Kiriwaya, Agusta Nina Addition Cause, Wabajan Shido, the Mount Pleasant, Michigan, Ming the Didda, Minwa, Grand Rapids, Michigan, Ming the Dojaba, Chippewas of Saginaw, Swan Creek, and Black River Bands, Minwa, Grand River Band, Odawa, and Shinal Band, Kachima Glitch, Gabijiek, Mompi, Schwal, not quick, Kino. Thank you everyone for coming and those that will be joining us shortly. And I was asked to do an opening and you know, I have grandparents that went to the local federal Indian boarding school here, and also a brother and sister that attended a Catholic Indian boarding school in northern Michigan. And so for many of us, we understand a lot of the purposes of those boarding schools. And so I think about today's topic, and really it's about honoring tradition, honoring ceremonies, and reversing the impact of historical trauma and cultural genocide that's happened in our country here. So with that, I'm going to just open us up in a good way with a song. I'm only going to sing it a couple times through, and I don't want to hurt anybody's ears. Funny thing is, when I do sing, I don't like to put my webcam on either. So I'm going to turn my webcam off and then sing this song. And this song here is it's used for a lot of purposes. It's a traditional song. It's an honoring song. It's for sometimes when we're grieving and also celebration, you know. So it has many uses. So I'll sing that song for us at this time, and you can continue on with your webinar here. So thank you. Thanks for asking me, Julie, and the webinar team. So Chimi Glitch. Mahal, Chimigwach.
Oh, miigwech hunter. And miigwech is how we say thank you in our Anishinaabe language. I appreciate the sharing and those those good vibrations that you shared in your song. So I appreciate that. So as we open in a good way, I want to move on that we can do our welcome and introductions. And so I wanted to introduce myself. My name is Julie White Pigeon, Minisikwa Indigenous Cause, Magizi Dodem, Saginaw Chippewa, Potawatomi, Odawa, Anishinaabe, Kwendao. And I am Julie White Pigeon. I'm a grantee technical assistant, and I've been with the Native Connections Tribal TTA Center for about 4 years. I belong to the Saginaw Chippewa Tribe of Michigan, and I've been able to work with grantees in Wisconsin, California, Maine, New York, Oklahoma, New Mexico, and I just enjoy, along with my job, I enjoy learning and participating in traditional cultural gatherings and powwows. So I'm really glad you've all joined us. Let me pass this over to Jacqueline.
Oh, ja, so dod shidne, she Jacqueline Salabayan she. Ki ani na shila tachini bashichin tabaha edisha do twitchini edishanala akutsala. Welcome. My name is Jacqueline Salabai. My clans are, like I just said in my language, they are Towering House, Born for Red, Running into the Water clan, and my maternal grandfathers are um, Edgewater, and my paternal grandfathers are Bitterwater. And I welcome you today. I am one of the grantee technical assistants. I am Dene. I'm located here in Arizona. And so really encouraging you and welcoming you today as we share about naming ceremonies and the importance of naming ceremonies. So sit back, get your snacks, get your coffee, and come on into the circle as we partake in today's discussion. So thank you. I will pass on to Idella.
I just want to say Val Pinayak is one of our GTAs, and she's unable to join us today. So we're gonna jump over Ithati Naku Sage. Oki Nixakwa Nistu Nataniku Episuaki. Good morning, all you beautiful people. Good afternoon, all you beautiful people, depending on where you're at today. My name is Idella King. My Indian name is Morning Star Woman. And today I shared that with you. I pronounced it in our Blackfeet way. My other Indian name is Little White Moon, and that's my Grovant name. And I'm also, let's see, I'm Northern Arapaho, but I was raised Blackfeet in Grovant. So I come from 3 different tribal nations, and I have names in each of my tribal nations. I'm a grantee technical assistant, and I come from Spokane, Washington. But today I'm on site at Agona in the Kumeyaay land, which is in San Diego, California. And I'm really excited to be presenting this, this webinar today. It's the last one, the final one in our series. And of course, we saved the best for last. But I'm really happy you were all able to make it here today. And so we're going to go ahead and get moving. I'll turn it back over to Julie.
Oh, miigwech Idella. All right. You know, this is got special meaning to us because it's part of our culture, it's part of our traditions. And I wanted to share with you how this how this idea came about for the for doing a webinar on naming ceremonies. The vision for this webinar came from experiences that I've had. a couple years ago, I was an online GONA for statewide prevention programs in Nebraska. And it was a virtual GONA. It was shortly after the pandemic. I was in a breakout room where we were talking about helping Native youth. And an elder was in my breakout room and she talked about naming. How our youth they've sometimes lost their way. And the reason could be because they lost connection to their spirit helpers and ancestors. The elder woman said that we can help them restore that connection by doing naming ceremonies for our youth. That naming ceremonies help our people, and especially youth, heal and become more resilient. And I believe that message to be true, that the words culture's prevention mean putting into action the traditional practices that have guided our people for generations. Naming ceremony increases protective factors and provides belonging, helps find purpose, enhances community and social support, increases optimism, provides engagement and connection in a spiritual cultural group. It builds pride, promotes a set of moral beliefs, promotes expectations for behavior and values, enhances psychological safety, and provides opportunity for connectedness to adults outside the family. And it endorses that high value of sobriety and well-briety. So we'll explore these ideas further in this webinar and look at how naming ceremony can be a way for our young people to heal. So this webinar is intended to be a gentle exploration of naming ceremonies. We recognize that these ceremonies may be very private activities in certain tribes or families that are not shared in a public way, and we respect those teachings. We hope to honor all the ways and beliefs, yet share some valuable cultural information that may be useful to many of us. So please, let's all have grace with one another as we move forward into discussing naming ceremonies, while we talk about how they can promote the aims of Native connections to increase belonging and build positive protective factors for our youth. So let's look at the objectives. So here's the objectives for our webinar: gain a deeper understanding of the importance of naming ceremonies, to discuss how naming ceremonies increase protective factors for American Indian Alaska Native youth, explore important elements and proper protocols in naming ceremony, and identify considerations for implementing naming ceremonies into Native Connections programming. So that's what we're hoping to accomplish here. All right. So next, I'd like to look at our foundational piece, the Native Connections approach, and how it guides our efforts with Native Connections programming, our planning and activities. So I'd like to pass that over to Idella.
Thank you, Julie. In getting started today, I really wanted to share our Native Connections approach graphic to get a chance to see where we are in using this naming ceremony in our Native Connection programming. And so if you can see the graphic, for some of you, this might be the first time you get to see it. For some of you, you know, this is one of our tools we use when we talk about Native Connections. I love it because it has everything is encompassed in our Native Connection approach in this graphic. So let me share with you a little bit about this graphic. So at the top, we have our community systems analysis, or we call it our CSA, and that's one of our first grant requirements. And so we start our medicine wheel in that direction. The 4 different circles on the outer circle is the 4 requirements. The second one is that community readiness model, or the community readiness survey. And we use that to find out where our community is. It's really important when we get started working to understand, where is our community? What is our community ready for? And so that's very important, one of our foundational pieces of creating and starting your Native Connection program. Next, we have the strategic action plan, which is at the bottom. And this is where, once you get your community systems analysis all put together, you do your survey, you find out where your community is ready and what they're ready for, then we start creating that strategic action plan, which is your goals and objectives for your grant. So everything gets tied back to your goals for your strategic action plan. And then finally, that last little circle, that's implementing your strategic action plan. And this is where a lot of us are going to spend the next 2 to 5 years together in setting up this foundation with our Native Connections approach. That should take about 9 months. And then the ISAP is all of your different activities. And that it may change yearly too, but mostly from years 2 to 5, that's when you're doing your different activities. So we're going to continue exploring this Native Connections approach graphic. So we have 4 colors and we have 4 quadrants of this medicine wheel. And on the outside, we have assessment, capacity, planning, implementation, and evaluation. And that is SAMHSA's strategic prevention framework. And so we incorporated what SAMHSA's requirements are, and with our Native Connections approach, putting them together. We also layered and embedded in here the GONA principles, or the GONA pillars. And for those of you that are familiar, GONA is Gathering of Native American, or GOAN, Gathering of Alaska Natives, I'm sorry. And the 4 pillars of GONA on the outside is belonging, mastery, interdependence, and generosity. And we kind of lined that up with belonging, where we identify our strengths. And with our let's see, mastery. This is where we start talking about the historical trauma and our historical resiliency. And next, in interdependence, the cultural revitalization. And then finally, with generosity, we also partnered that up with Indigenous evaluation. You know, what worked, what didn't, what are we going to do next time? And then if you kind of notice on the outside of our graphic, we have the different supports for our Native Connections programs, our national and regional learning communities, our grantee gatherings, our webinars, our buddy matches, and our GPOs, our GTAs. And all together right here, this is our Native Connections approach graphic. And so next slide, please, Mark. So in focusing in on this area, the belonging, the GONA, the GOAN theme, and this is where we're going to be starting our naming ceremony and youth wellness presentation today, is when it comes to namings and helping to get our youth connected to culture. Naming is one of the ways that we help our youth to belong to community, to family, to themselves, and to nation. And so that's where we're going to get started. In there, we also we identify the level of collaborations, capacity resiliency building, baseline data. This is the beginning point. And so I just kind of wanted to share where on our Native Connections approach to something like naming ceremonies and youth wellness, where that's going to kind of lie. The other thing I also wanted to mention with our naming ceremony is that in our in SAMHSA's strategic framework is they look at evidence-based programs. And so what we're going to be discussing today is adaptations and modifications to these evidence-based programs and how you're going to be able to incorporate these type of activities in your Native Connection program. Next slide, please. Oh, sorry, I lost my place really quick. Let's see. It is my honor to introduce our grantee presenter from All Nations Health. It's an urban Indian organization in Missoula, Montana. This Native Connection program is a cohort 5, but they have reapplied for a cohort 10. With all of her knowledge and experience, I would love to introduce Miss Dana Kingfisher. She's Grove On and Blackfeet. Ms. Kingfisher was a Native Connections coordinator, but now she is the interim executive director of All Nations Health. And she's joining us today to share her experience with naming ceremonies and utilizing the Native Connections approach. So please welcome Dana Kingfisher.
Thank you for that introduction. Oki ni Daniku Badat Boyaki Dana Kingfisher. I was born and raised in Browning, Montana on the Blackfeet Reservation. And my father is from the Fort Belknap Indian community, A'andi or Grovant and Assiniboine, Nakota. So it's my pleasure. I'm so excited to talk about our program and how we leveraged our resources and knowledge and partnerships to bring this ceremony to our community. Next slide. I think, a lot of us know that protective factors are very important to our programming and preventing substance abuse and suicide. So it's really important because, well, not everybody knows about protective factors, but I think it's really important when we are interacting with other experts and professionals that we have, cited material so that we can really drive home and, get the support in achieving our goals and objectives of the Native Connections grant. So here there's some literature out there, and I'm sure that you are aware and are familiar with the names. So protective factors for our American Indian Alaska Native populations for reducing the risk of suicide and substance misuse. There's a cultural and spiritual orientation that has reduced the prevalence of suicide. It by increasing the protective factors where our cultural identification is stronger in our identity, and that's that like sense of belonging, that increase in identity. We have better coping skills and then fewer thoughts about suicide. So the more that we increase our protective factors for our population, we reduce the risk factors of suicide and substance misuse and abuse. Next slide. So I'm going to talk about our grant on the right, and then the former slide too. This is our elder, and he's from the Siksika Sitnabe, which is the Blackfoot Confederacy, and his name is Leonard Weasel Traveler Bastine, and he is giving a name to a brand new born baby boy, and mom's there, and the aunties in the background, and so part of our Blackfeet ways or Blackfoot ways is holding a naming ceremony that where people can witness, this was their name, but I'll get into that next. So the community readiness assessment, the first year we conducted the CRA and engaged different stakeholders in the community, from law enforcement to youth to families, to get their perspectives on what they knew about suicide, the resources, and other questions. The stages of community readiness placed us at a level 3, which means there was a vague awareness about suicide prevention, substance use resources, and education in the community, or limited, what they thought was limited access to those resources. Engaging. Oh, okay. So, and then what from there, they'll give you like examples in the grant of, you're at a level 3 and this is how you can engage the community. And one was to do tabling. Like, we're all familiar in Indian country where that's like our, like our jam. Like, we know everybody, we can have a conversation. But then again, some of us aren't very comfortable in talking about suicide prevention. I know I wasn't, because in community health, it's like an array of health topics that we're focusing on. And so I wasn't just necessarily focusing on suicide prevention. So it was also a learning curve for me to, be comfortable in talking about those topics. And then this was the first year as well, when we're talking about stakeholders, as our elders. And so, this picture shows the 5th year of our grant. But I'm talking about the first year is where we started to engage our elders through an elders luncheon program that we have. This helped us to make connections and start building trust with our elders, because we have 72 tribes represented in the Missoula urban area, and so we wanted to make sure that we tried to make all the connections we could with people that could potentially hold knowledge and share that with our youth and families. So by engaging with our elders, by doing a luncheon for them, by telling them, being transparent and like, this is what we want to do, and then we got their feedback, I think it really gains trust. And that really, to me, is the most important thing if you're wanting to bring this type of ceremony to your community or to your youth, is that we have to gain the trust. We have to show our, because, growing up, not a lot of times, but sometimes people make promises and they wouldn't follow through. And so, we're a little like, is this like real? Are they just, saying that just to say that? And so every quarter we engage with the elders through a luncheon. So that's us cooking for them. That's us providing, honorariums to them. So we just had several engagements to kind of better and also to understand what knowledge they have potentially that could support us. Because not all of our elders possess the knowledge of a ceremony or of the ability to provide names. Because in our where we come from, that's a transfer right. Like you have to have that right in order to give a name. So just kind of assessing the community's knowledge of ceremony and then from different tribes. So the second year was the building of the strategic action plan based on the interviews of the stakeholders, based on engagement with the elders through the elders luncheon program. So we tried to really kind of be flexible with the goals. We didn't want to be too specific because then we're held to that specific objective, like, oh, you didn't achieve this, but to be broad, like, increasing protective factors through cultural connectedness, and then, would kind of get general like community events quarterly. And so I would just encourage, when you're thinking about bringing or increasing cultural access to the youth and families, that you kind of be general but a little specific. That way, if something doesn't pan out, then you can always have like a plan B or a plan C. And that's also just being flexible. And that's the great thing about our GTAs is they're very supportive. They bring ideas, just really flexible of how we can attain that goal. But just knowing that, I'm talking about the second year and the picture is the fifth year. And so it takes time. And so it's not going to happen overnight, which I like to like, we're going to do this and this is what happens. And we should have it done by the first year. But no, it's, just kind of thinking about when you have your grandmas and your aunties and you go to ask them something and they'll just give you a little bit of information to see if you're like invested, but they don't give you it all. So engaging with the youth through our programming was also key. We had already had 2 evidence-based programmings that we were implementing with middle school and high school students. And one was a land-based prevention curriculum, and the other was a social justice curriculum. So already having engaged with our youth through these evidence-based programming was also key because to me, it was like consistent, this consistency, like building this trust again, like they're trusting us that we're saying what we do and we're doing what we say. And then also in the second year is continuing, the engagement with the cultural community beyond our elders. There might be other people, and elders is really a flexible term, and it's really kind of, and we interpret it different, but sometimes an elder can be a young person that possesses a lot of cultural knowledge, but just kind of expanding our feelers, engaging in Missoula, but also there's a lot of staff here because almost 90% of us are American Indian. We come from different tribes across Montana and outside of the state, but also going back to our communities to really start making these connections. Like, I want to bring this ceremony to my community, but what do I have to do? Because a lot of times you have to immerse yourself in that population, in that group, because not everybody goes to ceremony, not everybody practices, and so I just have to be like, I have to make a connection in order to really have access to those knowledge holders. So creating a relationship with our knowledge holders is key, as we require for us at All Nations, we require background checks. We base our decisions off of verbal feedback from other community members. So like, somebody would say, is that Dana legit? Or, I guess I shouldn't say legit, but what's their knowledge? Like, what's their experience? And really kind of getting feedback from other community members to ensure that this is a safe person and this person's a right fit for our youth and families. So it's like, it really is going above and beyond to make those connections, but also to vet, because, our children are sacred. And so All Nations has a responsibility to create a safe space and keep our children safe. And so it's up to us to ensure that we're vetting our knowledge holders, to the best of our ability, given our resources. Yeah, so again, this seems as a daunting task, but if we're planning our events and activities, in like 3, 4, and 5, or year 4 and 5, then we have, these couple of years to really make the connections, build the trust of the community, the elders, the youth, to start creating the safe space where we can come. Next slide. So one of the biggest things for us too, as we learned, was really looking at, because we have so many different grants and contracts, allowable costs, unallowable costs. And one of the things that like took us back, because we also have like a state tobacco contract, we have a county contract where we get to buy food. We could buy as much food as we want, but with the Native Connections, you're limited to the $3, and it has to be a meeting. And then we're like, oh my God, how are we going to provide food? Because we know like that's a really strong cultural value, is like food builds connection. And so we had to leverage our resources and partnerships in order to kind of fill the gaps of these unallowable costs. But also, and so yeah, so these are some of our leveraging our resources and partnerships is internal program support. And so I would say that is probably the first place you should look, is because a lot of other grants, you can kind of connect them. And, a lot of IHS grants, an overall goal is like culturally informed, prevention work. And so being able to work together to say, oh, okay, I can pay for this, I can pay for this, but also the staff, because you need staff to support a big undertaking like this, because there are so many parts to it. And like I said, the CSAP, the MTUP, they'll provide food for events and activities. And then the Standing Buffalo Strong was also a staff support. Our IHS contract, our community partners, like we had a community partner that provided outdoor adventure work for the BIPOC community. And so we use that to recruit people and to engage our youth. They would go canoeing and kayaking and cross-country skiing. And so just even building those partnerships, because we never know. And we did have one of the directors of that program come and help and support and take pictures during the naming ceremony event. And so we didn't even realize that he would be, a really good partner at the end. American Indian Student Services, cultural knowledge holders, traveling to Missoula to our community, and the willingness to support and guide protocols and procedures. And that's that partnership part. That's like the year 1 and the year 2 and the year 3, is that my journey with building a relationship with Leonard Bastine was like 5 years in the making. And so it took all those years to then finally get to a place where he was coming to us all the way from, Canada by Calgary, Alberta. And it's been an awesome like journey, but it took a long time to create that trust and partnership with that specific cultural knowledge holder. Next slide. So assessing our community need. So we try to be as transparent and fair as we can. And so we kind of have a process when we're identifying which tribes to bring here, because we don't have money to, fund all 72 tribal community members to come here, or we don't have not all 72 tribes that are represented have the knowledge that we're looking for. So as an urban Indian health program, we try to be realistic but fair. We take into account the following things when we decide which tribe to bring those knowledge holders. The top tribes that we currently are serving, will assess that. Currently at All Nations, about 34% are Blackfeet. The makeup of the youth that we're currently serving. So we want to look at the youth that are represented so we meet with them all school year. And so we will identify those tribes, and it buys us time to start making connections and reach out to those tribes if the youth are interested in receiving an Indian name. They'd have to like be interested too, that they want it. The availability of the knowledge holder that preferably lives in our community. So we look to our community first. and assess, if they're willing, if they have the knowledge, and then we'll, expand out funding to support their travel. And that's the partnerships and the internal, just leveraging internal resources, because motels are very expendy. We're finding Airbnbs are way better, but just really assessing, can they travel? I mean, our elders are 70, 80 years old. Do they need somebody to drive them? Just taking account all of these things. And then the protocols. So, protocol with Blackfeet and bringing Leonard to Missoula is that he had the ability to come to us, but then we're working with another tribe currently, Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribe, and they only have one time a year where they're providing the ceremony. And so we've been in the works for a couple years with an elder up there to try to, plan a trip, which is one time a year with the youth and families to bring them to the ceremony because it can't come to Missoula. And so just keeping all those things in mind, but you know, just maintaining the relationship with those cultural knowledge holders. And really our goal is to, because we do have to make adaptations to our programming, but our goal is always to remove barriers from youth and families. And this is one of the reasons why we try to bring the cultural knowledge holders to our community. Being realistic about what is the makeup of our families and the barriers that they might be coming up against. Next slide. Oh, and you could see all the adaptations that we've provided, and I don't need to read through those, but next slide. And then some challenges, like I said, providing the food, providing the access, because friendships and trust must be built, being consistent with youth, because a barrier that we're currently up against is transportation. And we're working on that, but we would love to have a van that brings our kids to the youth center and brings them home in the evening, but we're currently experiencing that. Just leveraging staff training, like doing a staff training, bringing the cultural knowledge holder and providing the staff training, but then in the evening providing the event, so that way, we're hitting two birds with one stone, so to speak. And then also justifying the payment. Now they're very supportive, but I remember there was a time where we couldn't pay the knowledge holders what they were worth, because in Western way, it's like you have to have the credentials of a PhD. Oh yeah, we'll pay you this, but really advocating for our knowledge holders because they do possess a PhD, but in our ways. And so now I feel SAMHSA is very supportive in that, and it's just, justifying it and gathering information from other organizations that have tried it successfully. And then also just we have to work with, sometimes we have to work with the knowledge holder because they might not, I don't accept cash, I accept other things, but also knowing that they're not going to, sometimes our elders don't specifically tell you that you need to give them a gift and you might miss that. And so really having these protocols like lined out in writing for the staff so that we're very just sensitive to what their needs, but also knowing they might not voice those. Next slide. So yeah, thank you very much. I am going to pass it to Jacqueline.
Awesome. Thank you, Dana. We really appreciate your amazing words and sharing your story and the experiences that you've had at your organization. As we move into the next portion, we will move forward with gaining a deeper understanding, belonging. We're going to talk about why is naming important. So as we know, there are many different tribes and nations that practice naming ceremonies, and they are all done differently. Sometimes they are done differently in the same tribe that comes from similar regions in the area, such as Navajo. Southwestern Navajo might do it different from Northeastern Navajo. That's just an example. Instilling positive strength is the reason the naming ceremony is performed. The real purpose is connecting our youth to our culture and strengthening our youth to prevent suicide and substance use misuse. When we think about naming ceremonies, the names create a self-fulfilling approach that connects to the vision in their name, creating positive outcomes. The naming ceremony is a spiritual connection that creates and reinforces self-actualization and identity. And when we think of the Gona theme of belonging, we think about where and how we fit into a specific space. We think of our name. If you take time to think of your name and its history, your name is your source of power, strength. And you may have a name that goes back generations, and your name may carry a sacred location, a sacred song. You may carry a sacred element. You may carry a strength of an animal. But all in all, you carry prayer and strength in your name. So when a name is given, the youth feel a sense of attachment, a sense of significance, and a sense of belonging. And so with this, we are now going to watch a little clip of Kyrie Irving at Standing Rock Sioux naming ceremony. So Mark, could you please play that video?
First and foremost, I want to say thank you for allowing myself and my family, well, I'm appreciative to be here amongst all of my family at this point. Thank you. Yeah, this is, I will not necessarily keep this brief, but I will keep it as short as I can for just telling you guys how appreciative I am to be here. And there was a certain point in my life where I had come almost at a crossroads with my dad, my sister, my friends, my grandparents. And I had no idea kind of what direction to go into because I had lost a sense of a foundation that I know I had lost a long time ago. And knowing that my mom passed and left me such a powerful, empowering family, such as Standing Rock, as well as all the United Sioux Nation. I mean, to be a part of it now, and not just outside supporter, but knowing that this is family for life. And blood couldn't make us any closer. And our journeys have been directed in so many different ways, but yet we're still standing here August 23rd, 2018, embracing each other as if we haven't lost any time. And it's really special for me to be here because I lost my mom at a very, very young age, and I had no idea that I would end up belonging to almost 4 different families. My dad's side, my grandparents' side, my mom's side, and ultimately my own family that I'm starting now with my young daughter, Azori Elizabeth Irving, who I named after my mom. But this is a very special day simply because I get to really, really be intimate with a lot of individuals that I haven't necessarily met face to face all of yet. But the fact that the support has been there, even without necessarily knowing each other, shows how special and what it means to be a native of this country and be a Native American. And for me, I had no idea. I had no idea about the history. I had no idea how inclusive this group is and what it means to be part of Standing Rock and be part of the United Sioux Nation. So I want to thank all you guys for hosting myself, my sister, my best friend Brett Carroll, my grandparents, and the fact that I get to meet my family finally. I mean, you guys have no idea. This is finally meeting my mom's family, and now I'm with you guys forever, and I hope that you don't mind that, because I don't mind it either. So I want to dedicate this to the ones that have come before me, the ones that are still presently here with us, and as well as the future generation of kids that will be leading our country, as well as the Sioux tribe. So I thank you guys, and I'm from the bottom of my heart. I cannot wait to come back. Seriously, I mean, like, this is family for me now. I don't know anything else, so thank you guys.
Awesome. So using Kyrie Irving's words, he used the words connection, connecting, foundation, family, and belonging when he was describing this process. And these are all important aspects of the naming ceremony. And so when we think about foundation, we ask ourselves, what is at the core of the naming ceremony? As we move into the next slide, we're going to talk about the Western versus Indigenous perspective. And many of you might have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is taught in most Western education settings and systems. An interesting finding is that the Maslow's hierarchy of needs was informed by Blackfoot Blackfeet Nation. And Blackfoot is used by the First Nations in Canada, in case you were wondering. In notes taken by Abraham Maslow, it was found that Maslow spent 6 weeks at the Blackfoot Reserve in 1938. Although his findings were not 100% Blackfoot way of life, some of them were included in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Ryan Heavyhead, also known as Ryan First Diver, and the late Narcisse Blood, members of the Blackfoot Nation, summarized their findings to create the First Nations perspective of hierarchy of needs. The model shown here, if you take a look at this on your left side, it's hard to see, but if you take a look at that, self-actualization is pretty much towards the middle, right? At the foundation, we have those basic physiological needs. And as you move into the top, and the very top is that transcendence. And if you take a look at the model on the right, we have self-actualization at the very bottom that moves into community actualization and then the cultural perpetuity. And as you can see, the foundation of this perspective is self-actualization, the basic human need to live up to our fullest potential. Self-actualization is defined as the realization or fulfillment of one's talents and potentials, especially considered as a drive or need present in everyone. The realization of being needed is what comes to my mind when it is simplified. The realization of being needed. When we are in the womb, we as American Indians, tribes, nations, indigenous people have certain traditional customs that we partake in when it comes to our mother and our father, and especially the connection that mom and baby have and to maintain a healthy journey together. Mom, dad, and baby create a connection and practice prayer, songs, and words to ensure baby knows what to expect and is also introduced to family and relatives. We start to tell baby how they belong, which creates an inherent knowing of who they are. So when baby is born, we as parents, families, we each play a different role in a child's birth ceremony, their naming ceremony, providing care and teachings. And along the way, a child is given a name and is called this again and again, which is essentially creating a vision for their life. And this is setting the intention of self and creating a realization of need when a child receives his arrival of self, coming into that transcendence. And we see our children as equal, often greater than ourselves, right? We're always doing everything and anything because our children are sacred and we treat them accordingly. And giving a name for a child to live up to is the concept here. And we treat them in that manner and we show them how to live up to this name. An example is giving a child name leader, herb caretaker, healer, medicine person. And those are just a few examples. And they will be trained and grow into these titles. Therefore, it's not earned, it is innate. Education, prayer, ritual, ceremonies, individual experiences, and vision quests can help invite the expression of the sacred self into the world. And this is how self-actualization is fostered in our communities. This in turn assists in the development of roles and further instills community actualization and cultural perpetuity. And community actualization is the work of meeting basic needs, ensuring safety, and creating the conditions for the expression of purpose as a community responsibility, not an individual one. The responsibility we hold to the community, ensuring a reciprocal process. We give and we help because the concept is in the future, we may need assistance, and we continue this throughout our lives. And the passing down of our culture, language, and tradition is going to withstand time to be shared to the coming generations to ensure a healthy next 7 generations. So as we move into the next slide, we will discuss how naming ceremonies increase protective factors for American Indian Alaska Native youth in the concept I belong. And taking all the good words that were shared by Dana into consideration, we will talk about protective factors. And there are several ways that names can help increase protective factors for youth. Protective factors are characteristics associated with a lower likelihood of negative outcomes or that reduce a risk factor's impact as defined by SAMHSA. The first is on an individual level. On an individual level, it can give the youth a sense of purpose, whether it be a provider, a mentor, mother, father, uncle, aunt, grandma, grandpa, whatever that relation is to the family or the person that is naming them. And a name can help youth to create self-efficacy. Self-efficacy is an individual's belief in their capacity to act in the ways necessary to reach specific goals. The self-regulation skills are created, relational skills, problem-solving skills, involvement in positive activities. And those are just a few examples. A relational level, relationships with parents, families, and those around us, parenting competencies, positive peers, parent or caregiver well-beings are some of the things that are included. On the community level, positive school environments, stable living situations, and positive community environments. And in terms of traditional practices, they're often social and communal. Protective factors of culture include the following: strong family support, strong relationships, which establish emotional attachment, religious and spiritual engagement, which reinforces the value of living, community social support and significance, which increases the degree in which people feel you matter and make a difference. As we move into the next slide to discuss positive impacts, these are just a few examples of the positive impacts that come from a name. And I'm sure you have more examples and more thoughts in mind that pertain to the many, many positive impacts that come from naming ceremonies. One of those areas is providing support for youth. For example, if the youth was named after someone, not only was the youth received a name, but also gain an extended family, even a community, depending on the name. This supports expectations of behaviors and values, especially if they were named after an influential leader, an elder, or ancestor of the community. Then positive self-esteem, positive self-worth, extended family, and support of whole communities. And so taking all this into consideration, at this time, we would like you to submit in the chat what positive impacts you would like to share from your own experience. So we're going to take a few minutes. If you could put in the chat, maybe you want to share a little bit about your naming ceremony or the impacts that you have, those positive impacts that you would like to share about your own experience. So if you want to do that in the next few seconds, we'll give you a couple of minutes to share. And I'm always interested in hearing people's stories about their names, right? It's a great icebreaker if you ever come into Talking Circle or you're leading a group or even with community, you can ask that simple question: where did you get your name from? And we could spend hours. I remember, just sharing, and we went around circle one time and everyone was just blown away by the awesome stories they had. And some of us could go into detail about our names that were given to us later on in life and possibly those different roles that we've achieved. And we go into new roles, right? And we receive a new name. And some of us, our names are sacred to us and we only share those in ceremony, but we can talk about how our name was given to us, our first name, and where our last name comes from, if it has a traditional, or maybe it was translated by the school, and it was shifted into for my, like my last name was shifted, and it was spelled in a different way. And so, do we have anything in the chat about positive experiences or impacts from your own personal naming ceremonies? I cannot see the chat.
There's nothing yet.
Okay. But
So-
keep that in mind as we move
can
forward.
I can share some positives from the youth that received a name from our program.
Awesome.
They've started to Indian dance. They've started to introduce themselves in their language, like really, like, I want to learn my language. I want to learn. So we taught the youth how to do an introduction with their Indian name and who their parents are and their grandparents. And also really, because of that, really feeling confident and starting to take on these little leadership roles with just within our programming. So it's been a really just awesome transition to see them just like prosper and grow and be more confident.
Awesome. I appreciate that. It is a beautiful thing to watch individuals when they start to introduce themselves, when they start to understand their clanship. For Navajo, it's our clans. Um, that holds who we are as leaders in the community, our role. And so when you start to talk about that and you see the little ones embrace that, it's beautiful. It's amazing. So thank you for sharing that. I will now pass on to, Candace. My name was given to me by my Nolly paternal grandmother. She's no longer with us, but she was a great Navajo weaver and had thick hair that I resemble from her. Also, I am only allowed to share that amongst my family. Yeah. Yeah, some of these stories are very sacred to us, and only some people can hear them. Like I said in my example. So thank you for sharing that, Candace. Yeah, I really appreciate you. Does anyone have any other thoughts?
I just wanted to mention, this is Julie, that what Dana shared, and when we talk about hearing our youth introduce themselves in their native language, to me, I just picture our ancestors celebrating, because that was the first thing that was taken away from our youth was that language. And, and that was in those boarding schools, separating and severing that connection. So that's what I think, why those, the positive impacts, the being able to introduce themselves really touches me when I hear our youth being able to introduce themselves, because that is, to me, proof of us regaining back those things that we lost and that were taken from our people. And so I really enjoy that. I appreciate that.
Yes, Deborah. Thank you for that.
Yeah,
Julie.
yeah, I just wanted to say really quick, that names are really important in our family. I'm in the Grovant tribe, and one of the, my middle name, Phoebe, that's my grandma's name, but I also have her Indian name also, which I've also passed down to one of my granddaughters. And, I that name, my names have always been, these names are a source of strength for me, because my grandma was, she was born in the late 1800s, and she was a really strong Indian woman that survived so many traumas that she lived to be an old lady. And she's just been somebody that I've looked up to all my life, and hope that I could be as resilient as she was in her life. And so, having her names have always been a really source of strength. And then again, like I said, I pass those down to my granddaughter. And so that's also something that when we pray in our ways, we use our Indian names at that time. And so that's also like our lifeline, our life support to, the spirit world too, and during our prayers and stuff. So, those, it's just part of who we are. through our
Mhm.
names. Anyway, just a comment.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah. Appreciate your words. I see your comment in the chat, Rebecca. My parents named me after a missionary's wife. Yes, and sometimes we have, like Julie was talking about, sometimes things have come into our communities, whether that's assimilation, colonization, policies that have prevented us from receiving some of these ceremonial processes or ceremonies or ways of life, right? Um, and so a lot of our people today, we might not have the ability to receive a name in ceremony. We might not have um, an Indian name, so that's okay. And that's if you that's something that you want to start to journey down and start to think about, put yourself in that shoe of a youth who wasn't raised in that way, who's in an urban area or maybe even a rural area, and they do not know anything about their culture or their practices, and inviting them into programming. And what does that look like, right? What is that gentle approach that we should take in initiating that discussion? So, good comments. I appreciate your comments and being brave and sharing that, Rebecca. I really appreciate that. So thank you. If there's not any more comments, I'm going to pass it over to you, Julie.
Oh, thank you, Jacqueline. I appreciate that with what you shared and with what was shared when we talk about namings. This is something very close to my heart. And I wanted to go into the next section, and it's exploring important protocols. Now, we're going to talk about important elements and proper protocols in the naming ceremony, and this is something that, it kind of has different ways to look at it, but all our cultural traditional practices, they all have protocols. And to me, it's a labor of love and learning to find out and to observe those protocols. It's not so much to outline the do's and don'ts, but to demonstrate the respect and honor for those ancestors who maintained our cultural ways that help our people heal and thrive. So I want to talk about protocols because we're kind of moving into this section of how to move forward when we're talking about naming ceremonies. If we want to get more involved, to get more connected, and to look at naming ceremonies and how we can take action in that direction. So this is about seeking guidance. So the next slide, there's kind of some buzzwords when we talk about cultural learning. And one of them is cultural competence. I hear the word cultural competence, and it was like kind of a buzzword for a while. And I wanted to relate that to cultural humility. Cultural competence, they'd say it's intended to educate on cultural differences among groups of individuals and facilitate communication between different groups. And cultural competence, to me, that word kind of like seems to assume that there's an endpoint, that you achieve a goal of becoming competent and then don't have to learn anymore. But talking about cultural humility, which is where we want to come from when we talk about learning about naming ceremonies and other cultural practices, it expands on the cultural competence. So we start from a place of not assuming that we know about someone else's culture or their histories or life experiences. We make a self-reflection. We start with self-reflection without a bias, and make a commitment to ongoing learning and understanding of different cultures. Who we are shapes how we see another person. So we want to be humble without making assumptions. And what we can do as we move forward is find partnerships with others who know protocols. Importance of naming ceremonies in your community. Find out how naming ceremonies are important in your tribal community. Thinking, who do you ask and who do you know? Like we mentioned before, naming is done uniquely in different communities, sometimes even in the same family. But we'll talk about some common threads. I refer to my own teachings for how I talk about naming ceremonies. And again, there are many different ways and practices. And it's not my place to say the right way, the wrong way. as long as those teachings have been sought out and been provided in a good way. I receive my teachings by asking with tobacco and usually providing a gift when I ask. So these are kind of like a little bit of more along the lines of how to proceed. Find out the appropriate way to ask for help from a knowledge keeper or cultural advisor. Now, if I were a project coordinator and I wanted to explore naming ceremonies in my program, I would go first to my elder or advisor and say, hey, I'm thinking about doing this in our community. What is your advice? Then I'd follow those instructions. You know, I've seen in my life that when I consult my elders first and then I move forward with their support, things go well. If I were ever questioned, well, why did I do something? Those elders that I consulted would back me up. And that has happened in the past to me. And those elders, they stood with me because I asked first and then took action based on their guidance. So let's look at who can give names. There's terminology of our resource people who are traditional cultural knowledge keepers. We call them different names and they may be able to fulfill certain duties and roles. On the other hand, there may be people who claim to have knowledge and don't. And we could look at that too. But who can give names? Designated person who has earned the right to give names. And within the family, it may be an elder, a parent, or grandparent. I think of cultural resource person as being sometimes at work in our Native Connections programs. They may be knowledgeable for certain topics. Like there may be somebody that's very skilled in doing beadwork or teaching about ribbon skirts or shirts, regalia making, traditional games, singing, dancing, that type of thing. Some of them may know more in-depth teaching such as naming ceremonies, but many may not. Knowledge keeper is a universal term I might use. I might say cultural advisor, who I think of as someone who has a role in giving advice about cultural activities. Ceremonial person, that may be a leader of or a helper in ceremonies. A medicine person, I use that term like medicine man or woman. Typically, they've trained throughout their life to walk a spiritual path to provide teachings and practice ceremonies. Spiritual leaders, that may be a lead ceremonial person who's called on frequently for spiritual events. I think about when I think about who is good to follow. There are those that have many moccasin tracks to their lodge, and typically that's going to be somebody that is a good person to follow. Traditional practitioners, they may provide ceremonial activities or share teachings during cultural events. Traditional healers, that's someone who has a gift for providing help with medical or spiritual ailments. And we have traditional healers who work within the tribal health clinic. And language keepers, they are fluent in their native language and they can provide language services, and they may or may not be a cultural knowledge keeper. And then traditional elders, they're people typically recognized within the community to provide traditional advice or leadership, answer questions. And that may be the person to ask about when you're thinking about vetting other knowledge keepers and practitioners. We talk about these terms may be or may not apply to all of those who walk in the spiritual traditional manner. But I wanted to make a special note that and Dana has mentioned it, these always make it a priority to ensure safe access to our ceremonial people. It's a reality that there are predators who participate in some of our cultural traditional activities, and it's our sacred duty to protect our people who are seeking, and they may be new to these doings, and they can be vulnerable, and we must be aware of that. Some tribal or community organizations have background checks. Dana mentioned that, and that's based on previous experience where people may have been hurt. I do what I call a moccasin telegraph background check. I'll call people on the phone that I know in that area, and I'll ask about what's known about an individual beforehand. So that's another one. If you haven't heard that, moccasin telegraph background check. All right. Next slide. So here, asking for help in a good way. Many of our tribal people use tobacco or gifts when we seek help in a good way. So you find out the appropriate way to ask for help from a knowledge keeper. I give a gift that shows how much I value what I'm asking for. Gifts may be different depending on the community. Some do blankets, quilts, other specialty items. Some folks say not to use cash, but I will offer cash because I know it's going to be useful. In my belief, it's not paying for the ceremony, because that is something that we talk about, we don't necessarily pay for ceremony. But in older days, I would go out to their home. I would be cutting wood for them. I would be doing those duties for them and providing help in that way, because gifting people, gifting money, it allows them to take time away from their home duties to help me. It gives them the free time to be able to help. And so that's why I do that too. With Native Connections, we can talk about leveraging funding and getting help from collaborators, because we don't necessarily have to buy everything. We look at using the resources that we have. Meeting with the youth, families, and elders to discuss naming ceremonies. Like with Dan and All Nation Health, they found that naming ceremonies was what the youth were asking for, because these activities, these cultural doings, they must be driven from the grassroots up, not from the top down. And so also to learn about traditional protocols of your tribal community with naming ceremonies. Some ceremonies include food, gifts, honoraria. There may be songs, spiritual medicines, language speakers, maybe a certain time of year or season, certain locations, having witnesses, family members, extended or immediate family, community people. In some of ours, we have sponsors or like godparents, so we find out what to expect. And this also aids in collaboration who needs to be invited to the planning table when we're getting prepared to do something like this. Time for preparation. It may take a long time to prepare. In my area, it could easily take a year to plan a ceremony and gather the needed people together and the items. And that's after all of the initial protocols are completed. So it's something that, if this were to come about, that we would not necessarily be looking at doing it, right away. It takes time. And so, and considerations for gathering needed resources. It takes community buy-in to get everything together, and we've discussed this, and we can probably discuss it further too. But, at every step, I recommend getting guidance from trusted advisors if you have a question, because that is your support. That's your safety net of making sure that things are taking place in a good, sacred manner. So let me pass it on to Idella to take us into the next section. Idella?
Thank you, Julie. Next slide, please. So this is our title slide, Identify Considerations for Implementing Naming Ceremonies into Native Connection Programming. This concept, getting started. Next slide, please. So collaboration, and we've said it a couple different times. And I'm just going to be kind of reviewing everything Dana, Jacqueline, and Julie talked about, kind of summing it all up. So our CSA, Community Systems Analysis. Yeah, hey, pull out your CSA for those of you who have created it. It's almost like a community resource booklet. For some of you who've done this, it gets kind of big. So check that out and identify different types of programs that might be ideal for partnership. I really loved how Dana was really elaborate on the different types of people that or programs that she found and collaborated with. And so check out your CSA. The other toolkit we have is our community engagement. We have put a lot of work together. So don't recreate the wheel, but learning and understanding how to engage your community. We have some great ideas, and we'll be sharing more of that towards the end of the, I think we have some resources we're going to be sharing with you towards the end. So can I get the next slide, please? Gathering your champions. I think it's really important when we start thinking about how are we going to start working together. In our GONA, we have Tuckman's process that we use, and that's the forming, norming, storming, preforming, and adjourning. I always have to remember all those. So when we start gathering our champions, our people who are going to be getting together, it's really important that we start being strategic and intentional with the time that we have and with our messaging. And so one of the things I love sharing is this 3-statement messaging. And it was really interesting. I think in the early 2000s, I went to a homeless coalition conference in the state of Washington. And this is the first time I've heard about marketing and advertising for social service programs. And that was really intriguing. So I went and checked it out. And I never realized how important it is that we need to have those people who are really into advertising and marketing to be a part of our teams too. And so during that training I went to, they talked about this 3-statement messaging, and I wanted to share that. First, when you gather your team and you're doing your forming, then you start storming for these ideas. One of the ideas I was thinking about with this 3-statement messaging is it's one way to get all of your partners on the same page. So when you all go out into the community to start gathering resources and to gathering people, you guys are all on the same page. So just as it said, the 3-message statement is, the first statement is the problem statement. So what is the problem? The second one is how this is my problem and how this is your problem. Like, what is the buy-in? And the third statement is the solution. And this is usually where what you want them to participate in or what you want them to do, this is where it's at. And so I kind of came up with an example for naming ceremonies. So I have it written out here, and I'm just going to read what I have up here. But this elevator type of speech would be something for your champions all to get familiar with. So when they're out in the community, like I said, recruiting, this is how they can do it. So our problem statement: American Indian youth today are not feeling connected to the strengths of their tribal resiliency. Childhood and adolescence is a challenging time. Youth face many obstacles. So this is how it's ours, because that's universal with our adolescents, whether they're native, non-native. Adolescence is a hard time. And our solution: getting an Indian name helps you feel connected to tribal resilience, personal wellness, and culture. So this is just a little suggestion and idea. I always love to share this everywhere I get to go because it's something I remember, but it also, if you have everybody in your team saying the same thing when you're recruiting and gathering, everyone will know exactly why you're doing this, what this is about, who this is going to impact, and how working together, we're going to find those solutions. So next slide, please. Okay, planning. Focus your efforts. One of the things we're big at Native Connections, also with SAMHSA, is our SMART goals. So for those of you who are, I love how Dana had talked earlier about making sure that you really take the time and do the planning. And so when we look at SMART goals and objectives, we're focusing on specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And this is really important to do this. And I think when we were talking about these different slides, this was kind of like, well, this is kind of more, the Western people have to do this kind of stuff, or, in that other place. How are we going to use SMART goals for naming ceremony? Well, when you're working with the group, it's really important that you guys are, like I said, all in the same direction. I think of like those metaphors, we're all in the same canoe and we're all pulling together in the same direction. And that's exactly what our SMART goals are going to help us to achieve. And so I just wanted to make sure, throw that out there, that these SMART goals can be used in a really awesome way for naming ceremonies. And yeah, next slide, please. Some more considerations. I also want to say document your process. It's so important. A lot of times when we do different big projects, we find out what works and what doesn't work. And a lot of times what works is what gets written down. But I'm not kidding. It's so important. You have to write down what doesn't work, because when you're able to kind of review and evaluate what happened, finding out what doesn't work is just as important as what did work. So make sure you take and document this process. I always think about when things don't work out, that idea, that concept, don't throw it away. Hold on to it, because in the future time, you may have the right time, the right people, and the right way to use some of the stuff that hadn't worked in the past, because it is time and people. When you have different people and the timing works out better, an idea that didn't go no place in the first time you tried it might be the solution the next time you try it. So document everything. Also, the why. The why is very important. You always have to be able to relate your activities back to your strategic action plan. And so making sure, what is your connection for this activity? How is this going to relate back to your strategic action plan? That I think about is like our golden thread to connect what this activity is back to your strategic action plan. So understanding your why is very important. And cultural values, what we're presenting today, it might not work in your community because the naming ceremonies might be something that are done in a very strict manner. Get to know that, ask questions, because there's so much that are considerations, but only you and your community are going to be able to determine if this is a good fit for you or not. So making sure that you ask those questions, and it's so, so, so important to be able to link the past to the present. And doing these type of activities is exactly where we pull that historical resilience to this future time. Next slide, please. Okay, questions to consider. Now, we came up with some of these questions, and I think it's really important to kind of think about this. I'm not going to ask for the answers, but these are just questions to consider when you're planning an activity like this. What are the important elements and protocols to seek out? What are ways to seek guidance? How do we ensure appropriate knowledge keepers? And this is one of the things I know when Julie was talking, wanting to create those safe entry points for our reconnecting individuals, that, the community knows who safe people are and who are unsafe people. And so when we're working in engaging community, work with your community advisory. If you have a council that you work with them. A lot of times our community is going to let us know who safe people are. And that's so critical when we're reconnecting our people back to these ceremonies, making sure that we have good people who are in those roles. Another question, how do we balance inclusiveness in observing proper protocols? Now, that's a challenge, but at the same time, when I think about myself as an Indigenous person and everything that I've gone through, the ceremonies I've gone through, I also look at my education. And when I went to college, everything that I counted coup on that system. I'm the type of person, and most of us are, where we're walking and straddling those two different worlds. So I know, because I participate in ceremonies and cultural activities, I know what is sacred, but I also know in those ceremonies what is protocol and what is kind of a norm. Like, one of the things, if I was to explain a ceremony, I can explain the ceremony, but I'm not going to tell you the sacredness of the ceremony. I can tell you that our ceremony is going to include food, it's going to include singing, it's going to include dancing. And it doesn't mean I'm sharing all of our sacred knowledge, but there's a difference. And that's the place, I think, for myself with my education and my cultural experiences, is I know exactly how not to share our sacred knowledge, but we do have to write some of this stuff down so we're able to continue moving forward, so we don't have to recreate the wheel every single time we want to do this. And so let's see, what are resources and materials for naming ceremonies? And this is really important too. What are some of the materials? For some of the things that I heard earlier, is maybe cash is something that's going to be helpful for some of our elders. But then I also think of some of our elders and some of their income. If you get cash gifts or you give them a voucher or a gift card, that might interfere with some of their income. So make sure you talk to the people you're going to be working with. And I always learned in my community is what is it worth to you? And so, what do you have? And so there's not a certain number, like it's $500 for a naming ceremony. No, nothing like that. But what is it worth to you? And that's kind of where you start when it comes to how you offer gifts for this knowledge. And like I said, gifts can be cash, gifts can be a check, gifts can be these things, but find out from the people you're working with what is appropriate for them. And then we figure out those workarounds. And I was thinking sometimes even in our communities and even in our programs, if we're working with a bunch of natives, sometimes we even have to recruit our own people to be a part of cultural activities or ceremonial activities. And that's okay. This is it's important that we bring everybody together. The thing I really love about this webinar too is that we're talking about adaptations. We're talking about being able to fit something very cultural into a space like a SAMHSA program. And that's what's exciting, is that we're figuring out and we're doing the workarounds to make sure this happens. And that's, like I said, I'm super excited about that. But what are some other considerations in your community? And these are just things to think about. Okay, next slide, please. Questions and closing comments. Hey, Dana, would you like to come back and share any words or any thoughts that you may have had?
Yeah, I wanted to just add one thing about protocols and, when you're working with your elders, knowledge holders, that you're asking how it can be shared, because we've been guided by like, well, you can't share it on social media, but you can share it with the individual. And just knowing how, and that you'll know that from the connection and the trust that you've already built, that there are certain protocols, and just to honor them. Even though people are like, let's share that on Facebook, we're on a roll. And it's like, well, not in this context, but yeah. And I would just say, if you ever have any questions, you could definitely reach out to me. But I just see the transformation in our youth and the pride from their parents. And we went to Unity in Portland this past year, and to see other youth like introducing themselves in their Indian name, it was just like our youth just like validated that they were on the right track to increasing their identity and their sense of belonging and their self-worth. And it was an awesome transformation to witness.
Oh, thank you. I really appreciate you taking the time and sharing with us the work that you have done. And when you were talking, you had also said, this is year 5 picture, and what I'm talking about is back in year 2. So yes, this is going to be taking some time, but with a lot of strategic planning, being very intentional, this is something that's going to be so amazing. And it not just for those youth and their family, but for the community. This is our opportunity. This is no longer our culture and language and our ways are not suppressed no longer. And so now, we're able to do this legally, and we can get SAMHSA to help pay for some of these ceremonies. I mean, I just think that's just so amazing. Is there any other questions anyone has for Dana or for any of our other presenters? It sounds like we probably covered everything really well. And this was also one of our longer webinars. We knew we wanted to take this out to 90 minutes because this a lot of great information. A lot of people had questions about this type of a webinar. So we're super excited that we were able to present some great information. Any other closing words?
I think that we have some resources. Some of the information that we drew upon in developing this webinar. And Mark, I wonder if you could share that in the chat. So if you'd like to, and he shared in the chat, if you'd like to get these resources, we can make them available, and you can always reach out to your GTA and they can get these links for you. So if you look in the chat, you can click on that and download so that you've got that. And then also we have the references cited by Dana in her presentation on protective factors. So All right, well, we're at the close of the end of the hour here. I want to thank everyone so much for being here with us, and a big miigwech, chi miigwech to Dana for sharing her wonderful presentation. I hope you got some good information that can help expand your ideas on what's possible with your Native Connections grant programming, and I hope everybody has a great, wonderful rest of your day. And thank you very much, miigwech.